Joining me now to talk about today's topics are Ryan Dawkins and Kevin Caffrey. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having us, Tim.
Ryan, I'd like to talk with you first. If you could give a little history about yourself to the audience, please.
Yeah, my name's Ryan Dawkins. I am born and raised in Loveland, Fort Collins area. I graduated summa cum laude with history and political science degrees from CSU, and then I took my master's degree at Ohio State University. Moved back here in 2008 to work on the Betsy Markey campaign, and then after that I worked for Jared Polis.
Kevin, if you could do the same thing, please.
Tim, thanks for inviting us here tonight. My name's Kevin Caffrey, Tim's brother. Had nothing to do with me being invited tonight. I've lived in Fort Collins since 1978. Retired from Union Pacific Transportation Company, and I'm right now presently the president of the Northern Colorado Labor Council.
What I want to do is, the reason I invited the two of you on, gentlemen, is the topic for today is called the Boomerang generation. And I want to get a perspective from you, Ryan, as basically you've just come out of college, and what do you see as the future for jobs of that nature? And then Kevin, I brought you on so that what I want to be able to do is you can give a perspective looking back as Ryan is looking forward. Now, Ryan, the first thing I wanted to talk with you about, there was an article dated in November 2009, and in it, quote, it says 60% of recent college graduates were moving back home. And they also went on to state, could this be the first generation of Americans who will not be better off than their parents? How do you feel about that, Ryan?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up this topic because, prior to coming on this show, I wasn't very familiar with the term Boomerang generation. It wasn't until I looked at Urban Dictionary and I figured out what it was. But, it's actually something that is quite common, at least among my cohort. We've always talked about it in terms of a quarter-life crisis, or kind of this crisis of a prolonged adolescence.
Sure.
And it's tough right now. Myself and then a number of my friends, people I know, we happened to come out of school right when the economy crashed. Mm-hmm. And I know this has been a trend that's been developing since the 1970s. But the recession has really exacerbated a lot of what's going on. You mentioned that statistic, 60% moving back home. I mean, I have right here in an article in the New York Times just 2 or 3 weeks ago that said that a 40% moved back home with their parents at least once, in their 20s, mm-hmm. And that's a marked increase from, just 20 years ago. Right. So it is something that's very real. It's something that is, creates a lot of anxiety for young people, and it's something that leaves this big question mark in our minds. Kind of this soul searching. Why we asking ourselves, why is it that we're not getting the jobs, the careers that a generation before us was able to get, right out of college. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the economic recession.
Sure. Well, here's the thing, and Kevin, I wanted to direct this question towards you, is that when you came out of high school and you got on the railroad and you were laid off, there was times in your career that you were laid off, but laid off back in the 70s or 80s meant you were called back at some point in time. Talk a little bit about that when in times that you were laid off.
Well, the reason why that term means a lot to me is the fact that when you're in the transportation business, the railroad, we would have down times of the year, usually after Christmas or just before. And you could almost count on a Christmas present from the railroad being that they'd lay off just before Christmas. You probably wouldn't get called back until, early spring, that type of thing. And everything was seniority, so, the more time you had with the company, the faster you were going to get called back. And then where I live in Fort Collins, I have a lot of HP and high-tech workers living as neighbors of mine, and I chatted with them about their jobs and this and that, and they mentioned to me that they used to work at HP and they're laid off, and I said so when do you plan on going back? And they just mentioned that they kind of gave me a strange look that, well, I'm not, and I I just thought that term was misused because basically they were terminated. And if they were called back, it was as a subcontractor where they would never basically be a HP or a Celestica or LSI employee again. And I just think, we need to understand these terms and understand what, that high-tech industry is going through, and hopefully that we can make that change and change trade policies so that our jobs aren't outsourced like these high-tech people that make good wages, and we need those jobs back here.
Well, Ryan, what I wanted to ask with you is that are we seeing or do you feel that you're seeing that with you and your friends? It's called the multi-generational family household. In 1940, it reached a high of 25% of the population lived in under one household. And it went down to as low as 12% in 1980. And now in 2008, it's back up to 16%. Do you think we're regressing? How do you feel?
I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell. I mean, there's definitely something going on here, and I mean, this has been a trend that's been developing for the last few decades. I mean, and I think there's this. The economy is changing, and it's evolving to such an extent, and our social habits, our social organization hasn't really caught up to it yet. And so kind of the trend that Kevin's talking about with the outsourcing and things like that, I think that corresponds with what I'm seeing, in the labor market too. I mean, the jobs aren't there, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that, different sectors are shifting. It requires more education for us. I mean, and that's, this prolonged adolescence that we're talking about, this, this longer dependency on our parents, this moving back home even. A lot of it comes out of just sheer necessity because we have to go to school a lot longer. Mm-hmm. I mean, in 1970, you could get a good job out of high school. After that it was a bachelor's degree, and now, I mean, I'm hearing people talk about in order to be competitive, you have to have a master's degree. So you went from graduating from high school at 18 to getting a master's degree that could last, it could take until 24, 25, 26 years old, and so that's one of these changes the economy is dictating to us, that's forcing us to change our social habits. And is that leading to this multi-generational household that you speak of? I think that's definitely a contributing factor to it, absolutely. As for you're talking about labor policies and things like that. I mean, again, that's the economy shifting in a way that a lot of us, haven't been prepared for, and the economic recession has only exacerbated that, and it's made that transition so much harder.
Well, the thing is then, Ryan, well, how do you prepare for it? I mean, you yourself have gone on and got a master's degree, okay? Mm-hmm. Certainly you had a plan of what you wanted to do. The reason that you went and got a master's degree, either to make more money, to become more competitive in your workforce. So, but what good does that do you if there are no jobs being created?
Well, and that's what's interesting. When you think about kind of these life stages, you have all these benchmarks or these signposts that you reach. These mile markers, right? You have in there, you have getting married, getting a good job, becoming financially stable, having children. Just looking at the marriage statistics alone. In 1970, average woman was 21 years old when she got married. Average male was 23. In 2009, that had climbed to 26 for women, 28 for men. So our standard of expectation has shifted. Whereas maybe in your generation, you would have looked at finding a successful job, finding that marriage, having kids. You would have been in your early to mid 20s. Now, a lot of us we think of it in terms of that 30-year deadline. So we've kind of incorporated those anxieties and those shifting expectations into our expectations. So does it create anxiety for me personally, being 26, 27 years old and not really having a solid career yet? Yeah, of course that creates anxieties, but at the same time, and my friends as well are looking at it and thinking, well, we still have a few more years until we have to figure things out, But you're absolutely right. A lot of us are getting out of college, and we're, instead of getting that job, we're competing tooth and nail for unpaid internships, to be bartenders, bouncers, waiters, things like that, and it's tough. It really is tough.
Well, Kevin, I want to ask you, in between 2002 and 2007, productivity grew 11%. Inflation-adjusted median income for working-age households declined by 2,000. In the years that you were on the railroad, how did you see the way they increased productivity?
Well, what happened was there was a lot of technology changes that I noticed on the railroad where we're filming tonight. We're close to the Burlington Northern Santa Fe tracks. And what you'll notice in the trains that come through town, you'll notice locomotives on the head end, locomotives on the rear of the train. Now there's no engineer on the back of that train. Those locomotives are operated by the engineer in the lead locomotive, and it's called distributed power. And he controls everything with a box up in the front unit. And so, we're talking about situations when I first started with the railroad, there would be an engineer at the rear of the train running that locomotive. Mm-hmm. And they did, railroads tried, they were originally called slave units, and they tried radio controlled, that type of thing, but they had a lot of malfunctions and they weren't that reliable. Now, with computer technology the way it is, there's still some glitches and there's still problems because it takes more technology, more maintenance, but they run pretty well, and that's pared down a lot of jobs. And that's what I think we're looking at across the country with.
Well, and that's actually one of the things that's occurred in the last half decade or even 10 years is that historically when you look at the growth of economic productivity, there's a corresponding increase in employment. So productivity and employment always rose at the same interval. But what you've seen since about 2004, because of increased computer technology and increased automation, now what you're actually seeing is a negative correlation between the two, and maybe that is one of the reasons why even though we have a anemic, I think at best what we have now is an anemic economic recovery, it has still been somewhat jobless.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's the thing then, Ryan. Okay, and I totally agree. We're moving into the second decade of the 21st century, and you have to have technology to make. We're in a global economy. But as you become more efficient in a society, what happens to those displaced workers? If you are not starting, say, let's call it green technology, whatever, if you're not doing something to re-educate, revocate those individuals, what is it that you do with those people? They don't go away. The job went away, but the people don't go away. And you've recently just come out of college. What are you taught, in those kind of situations?
It's interesting. I mean, from a historical perspective, what happens to these people? There's political and social mobilization. Mm-hmm. That's what happens. In the 1880s, you had the populist movement. In the turn of the 20th century, you had the progressive movement. Mm-hmm. Even during the New Deal, you had the rise of socialism was such a powerful element in New Deal society that people often criticize Roosevelt. But the political criticism he was taking was not from the right but from the left. Mm-hmm. And he was trying to save capitalism more than anything else. And so when you have these kind of economic changes, and it displaces so many people, they really have nowhere to go. And that's what leads to this economic and political, the economic polarization and dislocation leads to political instability. And I think that might be one of the reasons why you see the rise of the Tea Party movement today. Largely, if you look at the composition of this movement, they're largely white, largely older, over the age of probably 45, mm-hmm. And I think that is a function of